in the component folder, I will create a new component. So I just have to right click on the component folder, open in an integrated terminal. So new terminal will open with that particular folder location. So I have to create a new component. So ng generate, either you can write a generate or a G. C for component, then component name will be data binding. Enter. So what it will does, it will create 4 files and it will update a 1 file. So the file it will update is app module. So you can see it has created 4 files, the component files, and it has updated app module. So in app module, the latest component created, class name has been added over here. Right? Now, once we have created the component, as we have not done the routing part yet, so app component is our parent component. So right now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to remove everything from here and I will just render my data binding component. So here you can see once you start writing now, it will suggest the selector of that component. Here you can see app hyphen data hyphen binding. Now if we see the component, same selector name you will find. See, it suggests also. So hyphen data binding angle and closing. So this is how we render one component into another, because app component is nothing but a component. But that is just a parent component. When we run the application, that is the parent component we get to see. So inside that, I'm trying to render the app component, app data binding component. Let's run the project now. So whenever you have to run the project, make sure your application is, your project folder is open properly. Here you should see your project name. Then only if you run ngs on the project folder root directory, you have to run ngs command, then your Angular application will run. Okay, let it run. So by default, it will run to localhost 4200. So let's open localhost 4200. So here you can see parent page is coming from app component, but beside that, data binding work is coming. So this is coming from our data binding component. If we see the data binding component in the HTML, we will get that paragraph. See. Now, like what is data binding? Data binding, as in the word itself, it is said like, how do we bind the data in the HTML? Data binding is how do we bind the data into HTML? So there are multiple ways based on the multiple approaches. Let me just open side by side. Now, before data binding, first, obviously, we have to create some variable. That variable value we will bind to the HTML. Okay. So first is interpolation. So I will create some variable, let's say first name. Now, alternately, I will be using all the ways by which we can create the variable. So I'm just giving the data type string and some value. Okay. So what I have done, I have created a variable with data type string and a value Shyam. Now this variable value, I need to print it. Okay. So for now, we haven't installed the Bootstrap, but for now in index.html, I will just add the Bootstrap link so that we can create a proper structure. Let me just get the CDN link. I will explain after some days, like how do we install the Bootstrap and how do we link it. But for now, I'm directly using the CDN link. Now, if you have to use the CDN link, you can use this in the index.html. In head section, I'm adding it. Now coming back to our component. Okay. So here, what we have done, we have created a variable. Variable name is first name. Now this first name, if I have to display this first name in any paragraph or somewhere, so I'm just creating a row column structure, call3, dot call3. Now inside this call3, I need to create a paragraph, and inside this paragraph, I need to display the value this variable has. So we can use interpolation. So interpolation as in 2 curly braces. This is the syntax of using interpolation. So now inside this, you can only use the variable. So this variable will go over here. Okay. So this is interpolation, means using double curly braces to print the value of any variable. So if we save, so here you can see Sham is getting printed. Okay. So how it is printing? It is just getting the whatever the value it has, and it is just directly printing. So this is the way how we can print any variable value. So this way it is called as an interpolation. So when we talk about data binding now, so there are multiple ways. From first is one way, and one way also we have two types of data binding. So first we are discussing is like from .ts to .html. So first type is interpolation. Okay, the first type means from .ts to .html. Whatever the variable we create, whatever the value that variable has, that we can print it like this. Okay, so this is first way. Let's create another column 3. Let's try to create one more variable. Let me just get the current date. So current date colon date. Now what I have done, I have just declared the variable. I have not initialized the value. Let's create constructor, and inside the constructor, we will initialize the value to this variable. So this, how do we access the variable into in Angular? By using this operator, because whatever we write, it is inside the class. So if we have to access anything inside the class, we have to use the this operator. So you can see once I write this dot, so it is suggesting whatever the variable we have. Currently, we have just created two variable. Now current date is equal to, sorry, in this variable, we need to store current date. So how do we get the current date? Like new date, whatever we know in the JavaScript, just like that. Now this variable, I have to print it in this div. Again, I can use, let's say h2, anything. Doesn't matter, like you need to display in the h3 or h1, anywhere you can display it. Curly braces, double curly braces, and the variable name. So what we have stored, the new date, the current date value we have stored into this variable, and this variable we have printed it over here by using interpolation. So let's save and check what do we get. So here you can see in that variable, this was the whole value present. Wednesday, March 2024. Time is also there. Time zone is also there. So when we say new date now, so this much value we get. Date plus time zone. All three values we get in the date. Okay. Now this is interpolations. Interpolation means you can directly print the value somewhere inside a paragraph, div, anywhere, wherever you need to print any variable value, you can directly print that value like this. So there that variable value will be printed out. Okay. Now another way to do this is, let's say I have a text box. Instead of this paragraph, let's make it small because UI will break. Okay. Now in third column, I'm creating a text box. Input, type, text, placeholder, enter, name. Okay. Now what I need to do inside this text box, I need to display some value, but that value should come from a variable. Inside this text box, I need to display a value, but that value should come from a variable, means a dynamic value I need to append to this text box. Okay. In JavaScript, what would have done? Uh, we have to give an ID to this text box, then document.getElementById by ID dot value, then variable name. This is how we used to do in the JavaScript. But now in Angular, there is a way what we call as a property binding. Property. So when we say about text box, what are the properties we have or the attributes? In another word, we can say an attribute like this type, placeholder, or even value. So this is nothing but a attribute of this input, or even this class. Class is nothing but an attribute of the div, means properties, attribute or the properties as a synonyms you can consider for now. Okay. So whatever the properties we have in the HTML for all the HTML element, that we can make it dynamic by using property binding. So this is first way, that is interpolation. How do we use the interpolation? Just double curly braces, and inside the double curly braces, we can use our variable. Now, second type, what we are going to see is property binding. Again, this is with .ts to .html. Property binding. Okay, second way we are trying. Now this text box is there. Let's say I need to, uh, let's create one more variable, course name, and directly we will provide the value. So all the different ways we can cover Angular. So I have created a variable course name where I didn't provide the data type, but directly stored the value, that is Angular. Now this value I need to display inside over here. Now everyone is aware like what is the purpose of this value tag. So whatever the value you give, let's say Chetan, I'm just giving, this is static value, right? This is not dynamic. So let's just save and check. So when the text box load, it will load with the value whatever we give. See, it is displaying Chetan, but this is static, correct? This is static. But what I need to do is dynamic. I need to provide a value which is stored over here inside this variable. So now property binding. Property binding means whatever the property which you make it dynamic, that you can wrap it inside the square bracket. Means this value I need to wrap it. I need to make it dynamic. So value as like this. Once you do like this now, it will throw the error for the Chetan. So once you wrap any property inside the square bracket now, it will only accept variables created in this component, because Chetan is not a variable, right? See error. Property Chetan does not exist. So it is trying to find any variable with the name Chetan. Okay. So when you wrap something inside the square bracket now, it will only accept variable name now. So my variable name, course name, I'm going to give it over here. Now, if you see when I save and when the UI renders, you can see text box is having the value which that variable has. So this is property binding. Okay. Let's create another column. Inside that again, I will create a text box. Text. Okay. Now I'm going to create a variable. Input type colon string. And here I will store checkbox. Okay. So what we have, okay. So what I have done, I have created a variable. In that variable, I have simply stored checkbox. Now, if we see like this is just a word, but what I need to do, this input type text box, this is static, but I need to make this type also dynamic. So what is property binding? Whatever the property you need to make it dynamic, that you need to wrap it like this. Now, instead of this text, we have to provide this variable value. So now, whatever the input type we say in this variable, that element will create. Let's save and let's check. So here you can see we have got checkbox. Instead of string, let's make it radio. Now you will get radio button. See. So what we have done? We have done the type also dynamic. So whatever the value we have got in this variable, that we have make it dynamic. Okay. Let's create another row. Call 3. And inside call 3, again, I'm just going to create a text box. Now one more way. Let's remove this. Okay. Now what I need to do, I want to display the value of this, let's say course name inside this text box, but I don't want to use the property binding. This is property binding, but still I can use interpolation over here like this. And here I can provide the value. Both this is also serving the same purpose and this is also serving the same purpose. Let's save and check. So now you can see this text box is displaying the value of that variable by using property binding, and this is displaying that value by using interpolation. Okay. So this is also right and this is also right. So when we actually work on the project, we have some specific scenario where only property binding will work, where their interpolation won't work. So there are scenarios which we can see when we work on any particular scenario, then only we will get to know. But As a general term, as in general term, both are working fine. Okay, so this will also work fine. Just Angular has provided certain concept. So this is property binding, means we are just making any property dynamic. Means we can bind any value to this property by using square bracket, by wrapping that property in a square bracket. But same thing, value is equal to, this is not property binding. This is like here, instead of that static value, we are providing the value from the variable by using interpolation. Same thing. So this is also fine and this is also fine. Based on your use case, we use that. So this is first type interpolation. This is property binding. Two types we have seen. Now this is from .ts to HTML. Now vice versa, from HTML to .ts. So first type we have seen like from .ts to HTML. Again, we are still in the one way only. So in one way only, we have second time from .html to .ts. And here it is, we can use event binding. So now we will see how we bind the event. So whenever any interviewer asks you, like what is data binding, so you should at least say this line, like we have two multiple ways, one way and the two way. In one way, again, we have two type. From .ts to HTML, we have interpolation and property binding. And from .html to .ts, we have event binding. So that is the answer everyone is expecting, not just interpolation and the property binding. This is the correct answer you should give. Okay. Now we have to see event binding. Like what is event binding?
Chetan, you can also say that DOM to a.
Now we have to see event binding. Like how does event binding work? So in JavaScript, if I said like on the button click, you need to show the alert. So what do we do on button on click equal to, we create a function and we call that function over there. So that same thing, how do we do it Angular, that we have to see. So let's create a function. Now, in the earlier session, I have told you like everything you will write, it's in this curly braces only, not outside the class. Now, it's not any rule or something like you should create function after the constructor, but it's just a standard rule. So we should create all our function after the constructor, not before it. Variable declaration should be above the constructor. Then we should have a constructor, then lifecycle event, then your normal functions. But we are not there, so we will just create our function. Let's say I'm just creating a function, show alert. So this is a normal function, round bracket. This is how we create function in Angular. We don't need to write function instead of a directly function name, round bracket, and the curly braces. That's it. So now here I will show, I will just use directly alert box. And here I will say button clicked. Okay. Now this function I have to call on the button click. So let's create one button over here. Here I will say show alert. Now in JavaScript, what we used to do, we used to write on click like this. See, it is still searching because we are working on the Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code doesn't matter. It's a HTML file. So obviously JavaScript event will show like this, but this won't work over here. On click equal to, let's say I need to call this function like this and round bracket. Everything is same. Just we don't need this on, and event will go inside the round bracket like this. So now if I just enter the round bracket now, see, these are the event Angular supports. Here we have click like this. So that on click you used to write, that got replaced by click, and that too in the round bracket. This is how we write the event. So let's just save and check. Like on this button click, this function is getting called and alert is there or not. So we got the button. If we click on here, you can see button click we have got. But how, like we are talking about passing the data. So this is like from .ts to HTML to DOM, from .ts to HTML or DOM. Now this is like from or DOM to HTML. So we are not passing any data from HTML to .ts. We have just called the event. That is also nothing but a way we are interacting from HTML to a function from the .ts. But we can pass some value also. So this was the type like we are passing a value from .ts to HTML, means whatever the variable value we have created inside the function that we are able to access over here. Now the vice versa of it. Now from HTML, I want to send some data to .ts. This is also way, but we haven't passed any value. We have just triggered our function. So let's create another function. Call 3, and I will create a button. Okay, here I will say show message. Now this was a normal function. This doesn't have any parameter. Now I need to create a function which will have some parameter. So show message, round bracket, curly bracket, enter. So obviously, just like you remember in the JavaScript, here we provide the message parameter name, message, and whatever the message we get, that we need to display inside the alert. So this we can pass it over here. Now, so you can see we are getting an error. So from Angular 15 or 14, we have got some validation rules on the compilation level only. We can disable this kind of messages from in TS config line. But whatever the parameter you create, just like that, you can see whatever the variable we create, we have to provide a data type to that. So same like that, whatever the parameter you create, you have to provide a data type to this. So how do we provide? Just colon and the data type. So now this function is like very strongly typed. Like whatever, wherever you need to call this function, what type of data you need to pass? String only. Okay. So now this function, I will call it on the second button. Again, click event only. Instead of button, let's make it span. Okay. Let's make it a span. So if someone has a doubt, like, can we call the click button on the span? No. On the button itself, no. We can call click event anywhere. Just like you might have seen in the JavaScript, click event will work on any element, whether it is a text box, drop down, radio button, span, H1, H2, anything. Okay. So now on this span click, I'm calling this function, but now this function has a parameter. So see here only it will show the error. So in JavaScript, it was not possible. If any function is there and you are calling it, and if that function has a parameter, if you write something, it won't show any error. It would suggest, but it won't show any error. But once you run it, then it will show. But in Angular, on the compile time, while typing running time only, it will show you the error only. So this function has a parameter. So obviously we have to send it. So parameter is data of data type string. So whenever we say the string, so let's provide a message. This is custom message. Let's save and check. So now if I click on show message, you are seeing this is custom message is getting printed. Just like that, let's copy paste just to showcase like how this from the normal function. From first function, we have sent this message. And second function, we will say welcome show message 2. So we have created two different span, and from those different span, we are calling the same function with some different message. So if we click here, see welcome is coming, and if we click over here, this is coming. So this is like passing the data from HTML or DOM to .ts. So this is the another way of property binding, event binding. Now this comes to an end of one-way data binding. These are the possible ways which we have in case of one-way data binding. Now let's observe a scenario. So now this first name variable, here we had that, right? So now for this text box, I'm binding first name only. Okay. So let's just see. Here I have binded the first here first name variable I have printed, and in this text box also I have binded the same variable. If I'm changing anything over here, this is not getting changed. Means this is just updating the text box value, not the variable which we have connected. Okay. Now see one more thing. On this button click, let's say, let's create one more button. Let's just copy this button. And after the text box, I will just add a one button. And on this button click, I will change the variable value. Just pay attention. Change first name. Okay. Let's create a function. Change first name. Let's create this function. Now in this, sorry. In this function, what I have to do, I just have to change the variable name of first name. When we created the variable, we have given the value as Shyam. Now in this function, we are going to change the variable value. So this dot first name is equal to, let's make it Rahul. Okay. Now this function we have called on this button click. So now just pay attention. On this button click, what we are doing, we are changing the variable name of this value of this variable. So now if I click on change name, you can see here also we have got the latest value. Let me refresh again. So this variable currently has the value Shyam, because on the page when we created the variable, we have assigned the Shyam value. If I click on it, you can see here also you can see the updated value, and here also you can see the updated value. But now if I change this, variable is value is not getting changed. Okay, just text box value it is getting changed. But what I need to do now, once I change the text box value, my variable value also should get changed. Means whatever the value I have in my text box, that should reflect in my variable also. So this is two-way data binding. Means on the page load, whatever the variable has that value will be visible inside this text box. But once you change it, so whatever the value you have in the text box, that value will get assigned to the variable also. Means in the variable and the HTML will be constantly communicating. If variable got changed, it will display the new value. If text box got changed, it will change the variable value, vice versa. Okay. So in property binding, it is not possible. So to achieve this, and the major advantage or the only thing we got in the Angular, which makes Angular apart from all the languages, that is two-way data binding. Okay. So let's see that. So to use two-way data binding, now we have to make use of the app module. Okay. So now in app module, we need to write one thing. So declaration is a declaration. In declaration is nothing but an array. So in declaration, we will add the components. Now we have got imports. So imports will contain the array of module only. So you can see browser module, routing module. So just like that here, we need to add forms module. So if we have to use ng model, so that is the directive we are going to see, or two-way data binding. If we have to use the two-way data binding, first thing in app.module.ts, you need to add forms module. So what you need to type forms module. You can see it is suggesting, and it is coming from @angular/forms. So once I select that now, one import will be added automatically over here. See, that import got automatically added. If I remove this, it won't recognize what is this. Okay. So we need to say forms module. What is form module? So from here, we are going to use it. So first step, when you have to use two-way data binding or ng model, first thing you have to do is import forms module in the app module. That is the first thing. Okay. After that, let me just put it over here. And let's open the HTML. Now, this first name variable only we are using. At the bottom, again, I will create a text box. Dot row, call 3. And here I will just use the text box. Now I have to bind this text box to my variable first name, but that too using ng model. So how do we use the ng model? Square bracket, and inside this square bracket, you need to write round bracket. And then you need to write ng model. M is capital. Okay. Equal to double quote, and you can pass the variable name. Our variable name is this first name. Here you can pass the variable name. Now make sure currently it is not giving an error. Let's say if I remove this forms module from my app module. See, suddenly it started giving error. It won't understand what is ng model. It will only understand ng model if in your app module you have the forms module. So if you are going to use ng model, wherever you see cannot bind ng model since it is non-property of input. You just have to add app module, sorry, forms module into your module. So here, if I add this, see, error is gone. So to use ng model, what you need to do in app module, you need to add the forms module. So let's save and check. Now what happens, you can imagine. So see, first name variable, here also we have printed, in this text box also we have used by, this is using interpolation and this is using property binding and this is using ng model. If I change something over here, see, this is also same, this is also same. Okay. If I click on this button, here also it got changed, here also it got changed, and here also it got changed. Again, let's do the same thing. If I'm changing the text box, nothing is happening. Only text box value it is getting changed. But now if I change this text box, so see, wherever we have used that variable, that value got changed. Getting it? Whatever we write text box means once we write something inside this text box, now that value is getting updated to that variable. It's just like in case of JavaScript, we write the onChange event and we get the value of the text box and assign it to the variable. It is that scenario. Okay. So when we use the ng model inside the any text box, ng model on any text box, this is how two-way data binding. So means once you change the text box value, immediately whatever the value you type inside that text box will get assigned to this variable also. So wherever you are using that variable, new value will be updated. See, here also new value is getting printed and here also. So this is two-way data binding. Understood? So how do we use two-way data binding? First thing, in app module, you need to add forms module. After that only you can use ng model. Now where I can add this ng model? Only on the input element, not on the span and not on the label or the button. Okay. Where we can enter the value, obviously input element. So only input element will, only on input element we can add the ng model. Now let me just close this app module. Let's create another variable. Let's create a state. Let's create a selected state colon string is equal to, I'm initializing with empty. Okay, I have created a variable which doesn't which has the empty value. Now inside call3, I will create a drop down. Select class form hyphen select class. Let's create some option. I'm providing value empty over here. Select state. Okay, now let's add some state. Here, let's say Maharashtra. Value is also there and the text is also there. Delhi, Goa. Okay. So what I have done, I have created a variable selected state. Now what I need to do, I need to get the value of this select or drop down, whatever the value user has selected, I need to get that. So what I will do, I will bind this variable to this drop down over here. So not on the option over here. This is my input element drop down. So over here, I need to bind it. Square bracket, round bracket, ng model, M capital. Okay, make sure equal to double quote, and inside double quote we have to pass the variable name. Okay, now this variable I will print after this call, again call3, and here simply I will print it. So it is, see, you can see it is not required that you should print inside a paragraph or h1. Directly in the div also you can print, or even directly over here also you can print, doesn't matter. Okay, so let's see. Here I will write selected state is colon. So let's save and check. So now you can see up here selected state is nothing, because on the initial state what we have declared it as initial empty. Now if I change the value, see that value got printed. So if you have to achieve the same thing in JavaScript, what you had to do on change event, you have to write create a function And inside that function, you need to document.get element by ID, you need to read the value. Then again, if you have to display it somewhere, again, you need to give an ID, document.get element.inner text, and the selected value you need to put. So much of code you need to write. But in Angular, that pain is gone. So very less code we have to write. That's because of Angular. Okay. So NG model, that is the two-way data binding. So two-way using NG model. This is NG model is nothing but a directive. So what is directive and why it is a directive? I will explain that in some days. Okay. Once we start the directive topic. So data binding. Now you might have understand like why this concept or the topic we called it as a data binding. Means various ways by which we can bind the data either from HTML to .ts or from .ts to HTML, or passing the data from DOM to HTML or DOM to .ts or from .ts to DOM. So we have majorly two ways, one way and the two way. In one way, we have from .ts to HTML, from .ts to DOM, interpolation or the property binding. And vice versa, from HTML to DOM using event binding. And another is two-way data binding. Okay. So these are the all various possible ways by which we can make the use of data binding.